The mockery. The morning sun filtered through the stained glass windows of the bridal suite, casting rainbow patterns across the ivory silk of Sophia Chen's wedding dress. She stood before the full-length mirror, her heart racing with anticipation and joy. Today was the day she would marry James Rivera, the man who had shown her what true love meant after her world had nearly crumbled 3 years ago. "You look absolutely radiant, sweetheart," her mother, Rosa, whispered as she fastened the last pearl button along Sophia's spine. The backless design of the gown was elegant and intentional, flowing seamlessly over her shoulders and revealing the delicate artwork that graced her skin. Across her shoulder blades, a magnificent phoenix spread its wings in intricate detail. The tattoo was a masterpiece of crimson and gold, with feathers that seemed to dance in the light. Each line had been carefully crafted, each color chosen with purpose. To Sophia, it wasn't just ink, it was a testament to survival, to rising, from ashes, to finding love when she thought her story had ended. "The phoenix is beautiful against the dress," Luna Park, her maid of honor, said as she adjusted Sophia's veil. "James is going to lose his breath when he sees you." Sophia smiled, touching the delicate wings gently. "He was there when I got it. He held my hand through every session." The peaceful moment shattered like glass when the door burst open without warning. Margaret Ashworth, James's stepmother, swept into the room with her usual air of superiority. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair didn't move as she surveyed the scene with critical eyes. "Well, well," Margaret's voice cut through the warmth like a blade. "I thought I'd come see the bride before the ceremony begins." Her gaze immediately fell on Sophia's exposed back, and her expression shifted from feigned pleasantness to undisguised disgust. "Good heavens, what is that thing on your back?" The room fell silent. Rosa's hands stilled on Sophia's dress, and Luna stepped protectively closer to her friend. "It's a phoenix, Mrs. Ashworth," Sophia replied quietly, meeting Margaret's eyes in the mirror. "It has special meaning to me." Margaret let out a harsh laugh that echoed off the walls. "Special meaning? My dear girl, you're about to become part of the Ashworth family. We have standards, traditions, and here you are displaying this cheap carnival decoration like some common street girl." Heat rose in Sophia's cheeks, but she forced herself to remain composed. "It's not cheap and it's not decoration. It's vulgar, is what it is," Margaret interrupted, her voice growing louder. "Do you have any idea what people are going to think when they see the bride looking like she just walked out of a biker bar? James comes from a respectable family. His late mother would be mortified." Other family members and bridesmaids had gathered in the doorway, drawn by Margaret's raised voice. Whispers began to spread through the small crowd, and Sophia felt their eyes burning into her back like brands. "Maybe you could wear a shawl," Margaret continued, her tone dripping with false concern. "Or better yet, we could see about having it removed professionally. I'm sure there are laser treatments." "That's enough." Rosa stepped forward, her usually gentle voice firm with protective anger. "This is my daughter's wedding day, and she looks perfect exactly as she is." Margaret's eyebrows rose dramatically. "Perfect with that graffiti all over her back? What kind of bride marks herself up like that? It's trashy, it's inappropriate, and it certainly doesn't belong in a church wedding." Tears pricked at the corners of Sophia's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had known Margaret disapproved of her from the moment James had introduced them, but she never expected such cruelty on what should have been the happiest day of her life. The murmurs in the doorway grew louder, and Sophia caught fragments of conversations. "Can you believe it? So inappropriate. Poor James." Luna placed a protective hand on Sophia's shoulder, right over the phoenix's wing. "Mrs. Ashworth, I think you should leave," Margaret's smile was cold and satisfied. "I'm simply trying to help. Someone needs to tell her the truth about how this looks. The poor girl clearly doesn't understand what's expected of her now." As Margaret finally swept from the room, her damage done, Sophia stared at her reflection with new eyes. The phoenix that had once represented her strength and survival now felt like a scarlet letter, marking her as unworthy, different, wrong. But deep in her heart, where the real story lived, she knew better. Margaret might have won this moment, but the truth, the beautiful, painful, life-changing truth, was still hers to tell. The wound, the silence that followed Margaret's departure, was deafening. Sophia stood frozen before the mirror, watching as the color drained from her face. The phoenix on her back, once a symbol of triumph, now felt like a burning reminder of how different she was from the world James came from. "Breathe, Soph," Luna whispered, her hand still resting protectively on her friend's shoulder. "Just breathe." Rosa moved quickly to the door, ushering out the lingering relatives and bridesmaids, with firm but polite words. "Give us a moment, please. We need some privacy." When the door closed, Sophia finally crumbled. Her shoulders shook as tears spilled down her carefully made-up cheeks, and Luna was there instantly, wrapping her arms around her friend. "She's wrong, Sophia. You know she's wrong about everything." "But what if she's not?" Sophia's voice cracked. "What if I really don't belong in this family? What if I'm just fooling myself, thinking I can fit into James's world?" Before Luna could respond, a gentle knock came at the door. "Sophia, it's me." James Rivera's voice was soft but urgent. "You can't see her," Luna called out. "It's bad luck." "I don't care about superstitions right now," James replied, his voice strained. "I heard what happened. Margaret's husband Thomas just found me and told me everything. I need to see my bride." Rosa looked between Sophia and the door, then made a decision. "Turn around, sweetheart. Face away from the door." James entered, slowly, his black tuxedo immaculate despite the obvious stress in his movements. His dark eyes immediately found Sophia's reflection in the mirror, taking in her tear-streaked face and trembling shoulders. "My beautiful phoenix," he said softly, using the nickname he'd called her since their first meeting in the hospital 3 years ago. "Look at me." Sophia met his eyes in the mirror, and the love she saw there nearly broke her all over again. "She's right, isn't she? I don't belong—" "Stop." James moved closer, careful not to touch her dress, but positioning himself where she could see him clearly. "Margaret doesn't know you. She doesn't know us. She doesn't know what that phoenix means or why you chose it." Luna stepped back, giving the couple space, while staying close enough to offer support. Rosa moved to stand by the window, tears in her own eyes as she watched her daughter's pain. "I remember the day you decided to get it," James continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Do you remember what you told the artist?" Sophia nodded, fresh tears falling. "I told him I wanted something beautiful to come from something broken." "And what did he say?" He said, phoenixes don't rise in spite of the fire. They rise because of it." James smiled, and it was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. "That's right. And every single day since then, you've proven that true. You didn't just survive, Sophia. You became someone extraordinary, someone who loves deeply, who fights for what matters, who turns pain into purpose." "But your family? You're about to become my family," James interrupted gently. "In 20 minutes, you're going to walk down that aisle and become my wife. Margaret is my stepmother, yes, but she doesn't speak for me or for what I value. She never has." Luna found her voice, stepping forward again. "I was there too, remember? I was there when you could barely get out of bed, when you thought you'd never feel whole again. I watched you fight your way back to life, and I watched James fall in love with your strength, not in spite of your scars." Rosa turned from the window, her eyes fierce with maternal protection. Your father and I raised you to be proud of who you are, Mija. That woman's words don't change the truth of your heart. James reached out slowly, and Sophia turned to face him fully. He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. When I saw you for the first time in that hospital bed, you know what I thought? Sophia shook her head. I thought you were the most beautiful broken bird I'd ever seen. But you weren't really broken, were you? You were just getting ready to fly. I'm scared, Sophia whispered. What if other people think like she does? Then they don't deserve to know your story, James said firmly. But I have an idea. What if we tell them ourselves? What if we make sure everyone knows exactly what that phoenix means and why you're the strongest woman I've ever known? Luna's eyes lit up with understanding. You want to tell them during the ceremony? James nodded. If Sophia agrees. I want Margaret and everyone else to know that they're not looking at something shameful. They're looking at a miracle. Sophia searched his face, seeing nothing but love and determination. Slowly, a smile began to replace her tears. You'd do that? You'd tell our whole story in front of everyone? Sweetheart, James said, his own eyes growing misty. I'd shout it from every rooftop in the city if it would make you understand how proud I am to call you mine. Rosa moved closer, placing her hand over her daughter's heart. The choice is yours, Mija. But remember, you've never hidden from the truth before. Don't start now. Sophia looked at the three people who loved her most, then at her reflection in the mirror. The phoenix spread across her shoulders seemed to catch the light differently now, its wings no longer a source of shame, but a banner of victory. Okay, she said, her voice growing stronger. Let's show them what a phoenix really looks like when she rises. The truth unveiled. 3 years earlier, on a rain-soaked Tuesday night in October, Sophia Chen's world had ended in the space of 3 seconds. The drunk driver who ran the red light never even hit his brakes. Sophia's small sedan crumpled like a paper, and she with it. Dr. Vincent Torres had been finishing his shift at Mercy General when the ambulance screamed into the emergency bay. 25 years of trauma surgery had taught him to read the signs quickly. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, severe spinal trauma. The young woman on the gurney was barely conscious, her dark hair matted with blood, her eyes searching frantically for something to hold on to. "Stay with me," he had told her as they rushed towards surgery. "What's your name?" "Sophia," she had whispered, her voice barely audible above the chaos. "Please, I don't want to die." "You're not going to die on my watch, Sophia, I promise." It was a promise that would take 14 hours of surgery, 3 weeks in intensive care, and 6 months of rehabilitation to keep. Dr. Torres had reconstructed her shattered pelvis, repaired the damage to her spine, and somehow, miraculously, preserved her ability to walk. But the physical healing was only the beginning of Sophia's journey back to life. Rosa Chen had never left her daughter's bedside during those first critical days. She watched Sophia drift in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling out for her father, who was stuck in Hong Kong on business, sometimes crying for the future she thought she'd lost. The hardest part, Rosa would later tell people, wasn't watching her body heal. It was watching her spirit break. For months after she came home, Sophia barely spoke. She moved through physical therapy like a ghost, following instructions, but showing no real desire to get better. The vibrant young woman who had been pursuing her master's degree in social work, who had volunteered at 3 different charities, who had filled every room with laughter, that person seemed to have died in the wreckage. Dr. Torres continued to see her during her recovery, not just as her surgeon, but as someone who had come to care deeply about her progress. During one particularly difficult appointment, when Sophia had missed 3 physical therapy sessions in a row, he sat down across from her in his office. "Tell me what you're thinking about," he said gently. Sophia stared out the window at the hospital courtyard, where she could see other patients taking their first tentative steps back into the world. "I keep thinking about before," she said, finally. "About who I used to be." And who was that? Someone who mattered, someone who had plans and dreams and purpose. Her voice cracked. "Now I'm just broken pieces pretending to be a person." Dr. Torres leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped together. "Sophia, do you know what I see when I look at your x-rays from that first night?" She shook her head. "I see a miracle. Your spine was fractured in 3 places. Your pelvis was in 17 pieces. By every medical standard, you should have been paralyzed. But your body fought back. Every bone, every muscle, every nerve fought to heal itself. That's not broken, Sophia. That's extraordinary. But I'm not the same person I was before." "No," Dr. Torres agreed. "You're not. You're someone who survived something that kills other people. You're someone whose body rebuilt itself from the inside out. That doesn't make you less than who you were. It makes you more." It was during another session, 2 months later, that Sophia met James Rivera. He was a paramedic doing a ride-along with Dr. Torres as part of his continuing education requirements. When Sophia arrived for her appointment, moving slowly but steadily on her own 2 feet, James had been struck not by her obvious struggle, but by the quiet determination in her eyes. "How long has she been recovering?" James had asked Dr. Torres afterward. 8 months. She's made incredible progress, but she's still fighting some internal battles." James nodded thoughtfully. "She's beautiful. Not just physically, there's something about her spirit. It's like she's carrying this inner light that got dimmed, but not extinguished." Dr. Torres smiled. "You should tell her that. I think she could use hearing it from someone new." James began volunteering at the hospital's rehabilitation center, initially telling himself it was just professional development, but really he was hoping to see the quiet young woman with the phoenix spirit again. When he finally worked up the courage to introduce himself properly, Sophia had just finished a particularly grueling physical therapy session. "You're the paramedic from Dr. Torres's office," she said, recognizing him immediately. "James Rivera," he confirmed, extending his hand. "I've been wanting to tell you something, if that's okay." Sophia looked curious, but guarded. "What's that?" "I've seen a lot of people come through these doors. Some of them give up. Some of them get bitter. But you're different. You're like a phoenix, rising from something that should have destroyed you." It was the first time since the accident that Sophia had truly smiled. "A phoenix?" "Yeah. They say phoenixes don't just rise from ashes. They're reborn from them, stronger, more beautiful than before." James paused, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "Sorry if that sounds cheesy. I think you should know how amazing you are." That night, for the first time in almost a year, Sophia called her mother with excitement in her voice. "Mom, I met someone today, and he called me a phoenix." Rosa had tears in her eyes as she listened to her daughter's animated description of the handsome paramedic who saw strength where Sophia had only seen scars. 2 years later, when Sophia decided to get the tattoo, both Dr. Torres and James were there to support her. The artist worked for 4 hours, carefully crafting each feather, each flame, each detail that would mark Sophia's transformation from victim to survivor. "It's perfect," James had whispered when it was finished, his fingers tracing the edges of the design with reverent care. Dr. Torres nodded approvingly. "Now everyone will know what I've known all along. You're a walking miracle." As Sophia stood in her wedding dress now, remembering that journey, she felt the familiar strength returning to her spine. Margaret Ashworth could mock the tattoo all she wanted, but she would never understand what those wings truly meant. They weren't just art, they were a roadmap of survival, love, and the unbreakable human spirit that had carried Sophia from the edge of death to this moment of perfect joy. The revelation. The sanctuary of St. Augustine's Church was filled to capacity, every pew occupied by friends and family who had come to witness the union of Sophia and James. Afternoon sunlight streamed through ancient stained glass windows, painting the altar in brilliant hues of blue and gold. Pastor Michael Hayes stood at the front, his weathered hands resting on the worn leather Bible that had officiated countless weddings over his 30-year ministry. But today felt different. In all his years of performing ceremonies, Pastor Hayes had never seen a bride walk down the aisle with such quiet determination, or a groom whose eyes held such fierce protective love. When James had pulled him aside an hour earlier to request a change to their planned vows, the pastor had agreed without hesitation. Sometimes, Pastor Hayes had told James, the most important stories are the ones people need to hear the most. Now, as the congregation settled into the traditional rhythm of the ceremony, Pastor Hayes could feel an undercurrent of tension rippling through the gathered guests. Whispers had been circulating since Sophia's processional, comments about her dress, about the artwork visible across her shoulder blades, about what was appropriate for a church wedding. In the third row, Thomas Ashworth sat rigid beside his wife Margaret, his face a mask of barely controlled embarrassment. As a retired bank president, Thomas valued propriety above almost everything else. He had married Margaret 5 years after. James's mother passed away, drawn to her social standing and her ability to maintain the family's reputation in their affluent community. But watching Margaret's reaction to Sophia throughout the engagement had left Thomas increasingly uncomfortable. Her criticisms had grown sharper, her comments more cutting, until today's confrontation in the bridal suite had crossed a line he couldn't ignore. "Margaret," he had whispered urgently after learning what had happened, "you can't speak to her like that. Not today, not ever." "Someone needs to," Margaret had hissed back. "That girl has no sense of propriety. James deserves better than someone who displays herself like a common—" "Stop." Thomas's voice had carried a warning that Margaret rarely heard from her usually passive husband. "That's enough." Now, as Pastor Hayes began the familiar words of the marriage ceremony, Thomas watched his stepson's face transform with love as he gazed at his bride. Whatever Sophia's story was, it was clear that James cherished every part of it. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Hayes began, his voice carrying easily through the hushed sanctuary, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Sophia and James in holy matrimony. Marriage is not just the joining of two people, but the weaving together of two stories into one beautiful narrative." He paused, his eyes finding Sophia's face. She stood straight and proud, the phoenix wings visible to everyone behind her, her chin raised with quiet dignity. "Sometimes," Pastor Hayes continued, "the most beautiful stories are born from the deepest struggles. Sometimes what makes us different is exactly what makes us extraordinary." Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her seat, sensing that something was about to happen. Around the sanctuary, guests began to pay closer attention, drawn by something in the pastor's tone. "James," Pastor Hayes said, turning to the groom, "I believe you have something special you'd like to share with everyone here today." James stepped forward slightly, his hand finding Sophia's and holding it tightly. His voice, when he spoke, was clear and strong enough for every person in the sanctuary to hear. 3 years ago, I was just a paramedic doing my job. I thought I knew what courage looked like, what strength meant. But then I met a young woman in a hospital who taught me that I didn't know anything at all." The church fell completely silent. Even the children seemed to sense the importance of the moment. "Sophia was broken when I found her," James continued, his eyes never leaving his bride's face. Not just physically, though her injuries were severe enough that the doctors weren't sure she would ever walk again. She was broken in spirit, convinced that her life was over, that she would never be whole again. Margaret's face had gone pale, her earlier smugness replaced by growing dread as she realized what was happening. "But I watched her fight," James said, his voice growing stronger. "I watched her endure surgery after surgery, physical therapy session after session. I watched her cry from pain and frustration, and I watched her get up the next day and do it all over again." Thomas found himself leaning forward, completely absorbed in the story. This wasn't what he had expected from a wedding ceremony, but it was the most honest, raw display of love he had ever witnessed. "When Sophia decided to get the tattoo that you can see on her back today," James continued, "she told the artist that she wanted something beautiful to come from something broken. The phoenix you're looking at isn't just art, it's a map of her journey from the edge of death back to life." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Several people turned to look at Margaret, whose face was now flushed with mortification. Pastor Hayes stepped forward again, his voice warm with approval. "In many cultures, the phoenix is a symbol of resurrection, of triumph over adversity. It represents the human spirit's incredible capacity to rise from the ashes of despair and become something even more beautiful than before. Every feather, every flame, every line of that tattoo represents a victory," James said, his voice thick with emotion. Over pain, over fear, over the voice that told her she wasn't worthy of love or happiness. "When I trace those wings with my fingers, I'm touching a miracle." Tears were flowing freely now, not just from the immediate family, but from guests throughout the sanctuary. Even some of the men were wiping their eyes, moved by the raw honesty of James's words. "So, when someone calls that tattoo inappropriate or shameful," James said, his voice carrying a steel edge as his eyes briefly found Margaret's, "they're not just insulting art. They're insulting the most courageous person I've ever known." Thomas turned to look at his wife, seeing her crumble under the weight of shame and the stares of the congregation. For the first time in their marriage, he felt genuine anger toward her. "Margaret," he whispered, his voice sharp with disappointment, "what have you done?" Pastor Hayes raised his hands, drawing attention back to the altar. "Love," he said to the gathered assembly, "is not about perfection. It's about seeing someone exactly as they are, scars, struggles and all, and choosing to cherish every part of their story." He turned back to the couple, his eyes twinkling with joy. "James, do you take Sophia with all her strength, all her courage and all her beautiful scars to be your wife?" "I do," James said, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "Every magnificent, fierce, phoenix-hearted part of her. And Sophia," Pastor Hayes said, "do you take James, who saw you not as broken but as becoming, to be your husband?" Sophia's voice was clear and strong, filled with the confidence that had carried her through her darkest days. "I do. He taught me that phoenixes don't rise in spite of the fire, we rise because of it." As Pastor Hayes began the final blessing, Thomas made a decision. He stood abruptly, drawing surprised looks from the nearby guests, and began to applaud. The sound echoed through the sanctuary, and within moments the entire congregation was on their feet, giving Sophia and James a standing ovation that seemed to shake the ancient walls. Margaret remained seated, her head bowed in shame. Finally, understanding the magnitude of her cruelty and the beauty she had tried so hard to diminish,